What's up, you guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name's Jesus and this is Building the Things. In this video, I'm going to teach you how I built this game here. It's a fun summer game. It's called Ladder Toss. You need, for material, you're going to need 2x4, wooden dowels. For fasteners, I use 2-inch screws, but you can use 2.5 or 2 1/4. You need to measure things, so square measuring tape. You need to write things down, so you need something to write on and something to write with. For power tools, you only need a circular saw or a handsaw and an impact. I use a miter saw, but I have a video on YouTube that explains how to use a circular saw as a miter saw in case you don't know how. No big deal there. For the more intermediate people that have a little bit more access to tools, we use Forstner bits and a drill and sanding to make it more structurally sound, but you absolutely do not need to use any of this, just this here. So stick around, and next week I'm going to teach you how to make cornhole boards. Super fun, super easy. Let's get right to it. Let's start with the design. Ladder toss. We know we're going to need runners, legs, and stretchers. That's the basic premise of the game itself. Each leg is going to be 39 inches from tip to tip. Each runner is also going to be 39 inches from tip to tip. Each dowel is going to be cut at 2 feet, so 24 inches from tip to tip, and 24. The space in between each dowel is going to be 13 inches. The diameter of the dowels that I'm using is 1 1/8 for the dowel. And we're using standard 2x4 for the general lumber. So overall, your cuts, you're going to need 3 dowels at 24 inches. You're going to need 4 pieces of lumber of 2x4. At 39 inches. That is all you need. So we have 2 options that we can use for the dowels. We could either place them inside the wood by using something like this Forstner bit here at 1 1/8. That would be the width here. And we can do that here. We can remove some of the material. So we can get this inserted into here, and we could just glue it and maybe drive a screw through it or a brad nail. So you could do that. That's one option if you like. But I like to keep things simple. So I'm going to just place it just like so. I'm going to find the center of the board, which will be very easy to do. I'll show you how in a second. And I'm just going to basically make a line at every 13 inches where I believe they're going to intersect. And that is where I'm going to place each of the dowels. Center of the board to correlate with the dowel. So we know that the dowel is 1/8 right there, right? So if it's easier for you, you can do a little line at the edge that will kind of remind you of where it's going to land. And we know that the 1 1/8, or maybe you don't know, but 1 1/8 would be, half of that would be, well, half of 1 is half. And then we're going to add a 16th because half of an eighth is a 16th. So we know that we're going to start measuring our 13 inches at and 5/16 right there. So we know this is where we're going to start the measurements. So now you're going to go every 13 inches from that point. Now, I like to cheat a little bit here and give myself that wiggle room so I'm not messing with additional measurements. So I know that that's where it starts. I'll hold it there at the 1 inch mark, and then I'll measure out 13 and 26. We are just marking the 1 3/4 for each one of these. All right, guys. So we're going to get to the point where we're going to start sanding these if you want to. If you do not want to, you do not have to. But I usually will punch a hole through them first before I sand, just because if I start sanding, my lines may erase. And if they erase, then it's going to be hard to figure out where I was going. So then I'll have to just redo the process. If you don't have a punch, which all it does is basically make a dent into the wood. That's all it does. You could take it old school and use a kind of finish nail or any kind of nail and take it to your line and just give it some wax with a 2x4 that you have laying around, and that should create your little hole where your screw is going to go. I would recommend at least going to 220 grit for your project. In my case, I'm going to paint it, so that's really all I'm going to need. And if this is too expensive for you, or you don't have one and you want to use a hand sander, you could do the same thing. This is the same kind of system, and I just honestly use the same ones. Kind of has a little room for the sawdust to go into anyway, which is good to prevent burning of the wood and to prevent the scratches, because that's how you get scratches on your wood. So I'm going to use the random orbital sander just because that's significantly faster. You do not have to. All right, so now you've sanded all your material and you need to start drilling the holes. So let's find them. So we have them here. And as you can see, the lines did fade a little bit. And again, I'm not doing crazy sanding on this just because I'm going to paint it. But if you aren't, you could definitely keep going down in grits, or excuse me, up in grits. So you can get from 220 to 500, etc., etc. You can start with 80 and hog off material, then go to 120, then go to 220, then 500. If you want to do all that, I don't. I want to keep it simple. So anyways, let me show you what I'm talking about. So we know we're going to start here, and we know that we eventually have to get into this wood. So basically, if it lifts, it's not in the wood. So we're at that point where it's going to come out soon. So let's keep trucking along. Okay, now we know that's where it's at. So if you wanted to, you could in theory grab your dowel and kind of line it up with the top, push it inward so it creates that divot. You see that divot, and see if that's in the center. So just like that. Which is what I'm going to do. So that way, when I push against it, I'm going to use my wall here to push against it to get everything kind of lined up the way I want it to. And then I'll put another 2x4 underneath, and that way I'll drive it in. So, and I'll give it some space so I can move it around a little bit. Like so. So now you have one of your dowels in there, and I will drive it in further because right now it only has maybe a 1/2 inch inside. So I'll drive it in a little bit more. So this is potentially what you could use. This is a carriage bolt. Now this one's a little long for my practicality. So this would be a little long. It's not too long, but it would be enough that it can bite into these nuts. I like the ones with the nylon on the inside. They tend to not back out. And you would just drill a hole through both of those, and that would make it easier for storage in the event that you wanted to. Another alternative is you could just screw it together and just leave it as is, and storage might be a little bit harder, but you can really, if you really wanted to, you can unscrew it at the end of the summer or fall or whatever, and then just store it that way. And then you just wouldn't use an impact right away when you enter the screw, just so you don't cross threads. You would just use a screwdriver to start it, and then you can use the impact after. So I'm going to do screws just to show you what I'm talking about. So to make it the most stable, you want to have the equal distance from one side to the other. So let's just make sure that we find our center again, lengthwise. So we're at 39 inches. So it would be 19.5, would leave us at dead center. And if you remember when we talked about doing 2x4s, the dimensions are generally pretty consistent. So you can always just measure here, and I got 3.5 still, so it would be the same thing for this leg. So you would just measure this out right above where you're going to be with your center line. Right above there, you would measure that here, so you can kind of follow it at 1 3/4. And then all you would do is line it up and drill it out. And that would give you pretty center. It might not be exactly center. And then again, if you don't have a punch, don't worry about it. We'll just throw them in and call it a day. And these are 2-inch, so you got to drive them in just a little bit. And these are then the ladder toss games. And if you don't have the balls, the tennis balls with the string, you could either purchase them, you could make them, you could use ping pong balls, do whatever you want, because it's your world and I'm just living in it. So for the select few that decide you want to make your ladder toss game a little more sturdy, I am going to recommend you get a drill or borrow one or purchase one. A lot of times they come as a 2-pack like this, and they'll be roughly about $100, and they'll come with a battery and a charger. Now, for the few of you that don't have that or don't want to do that, you can follow the following segment, which I did show you how to do it without. Now, it isn't as secure, and I would encourage you to do it this way. You know, again, still using very simple tools, but it would make it's going to look prettier, but it's going to be more stable. And that's the important part, because they're going to be outside games. They're going to get things tossed at. They may get dropped and all that stuff. So if you don't have a set of Forstner bits, you could get some. These are pretty cheap and they work really well. As you can tell, I've used them quite a bit, all the different sizes. And I haven't had any problems with them. I've never sharpened them. I haven't done anything special to them. I just use them. All right, so let's go ahead and find center of our board. This is a 2x4, right? So we know that it's really 3.5. So if we put our combination square to 1 3/4, just like so, we know that if we put it against our wood, we're going to be at exactly 1 3/4 all the way across. So you would, again, just find your measurements, just like I will show you in the next portion. This is just to show you what you could do instead of what I did do in the next portion. So you would just do a simple outline of where your center is, and you would just go ahead and find that. Now, if you have a drill, you probably have drill bits. If you want to start a really small drill hole, you can use something like this, 1/16, just to kind of give you a start. Or you could just do it this way, which is what I'm going to do, because mine are already pre-drilled. But you don't have to do that. You could just use your Forstner bits, what it is intended for. And now it is much more structurally sound because it's biting into all the right areas. If you're like me and don't like painting as much, you can go ahead and get your subcontractor. But just be careful which one you choose. This one said she had a lot of experience, but leaves messy work areas, doesn't take direction well, and forces me to paint. And then immediately changes her mind. And if you don't give her the paintbrush back right away, she starts crying really loudly, which distracts you from your work. So just pick a reliable one.